The new Apex rank split brings us right back onto King's Canyon. This means that there will be slight meta changes as it plays out a little bit differently than Olympus. Stay tuned for this episode of Meta Report to learn what to use for Apex Legends Season 12 Split 2. It's worth noting that Predators will drop into Platinum 2 with this split, so the first week or so will be very sweaty. As such, compositions and playstyles that normally only work on high rank may work all the way through the rank ladder. That being said, there's very rarely a playstyle or composition that works in high tier rank that doesn't work in lower ranks as long as you adjust for the different style of play. What makes King's Canyon so different from the previous ranked maps? It is the smallest map in the game with many POIs placed very close to each other. In addition to that, King's Canyon has a vast amount of high grounds and god spots that can only be reached through ballooning or in some cases exclusively through certain legend abilities. It has guaranteed high loot in cargo holds available in these permanent spots on the map, which only require one ordnance to break through. It's also the first ever map in Apex Legends that has seen many changes throughout the years, meaning it features a more refined playstyle and several unique town takeovers, giving you access to all kinds of consistent special loot, either through those points of interest, or the flyers, or the loot ticks. King's Canyon also has charge towers spread across the map, which you can use to instantly replenish the ultimates of whoever stands within the circle. These can be used to quickly rotate to a position or to cheese an early game ultimate, such as a jump pad, zipline, or even spamming the lifeline ultimate. The availability of loot, its small size, and the density of its points of interest makes King's Canyon an incredibly fast played map. And it's not rare to see less than 10 squads by the end of the first ring. As previously mentioned, King's Canyon is the oldest map in the game, having seen changes in almost every section. Because of this, it has the most unique drop spots in the game, either by town takeovers or other gimmicks. So in addition to good loot, the Gauntlet has jump pads strewn across it, with a guaranteed high tier or golden item in the middle flaming ring. The water treatment has a caustic sludge in the middle, but if you activate these pumps available on both sides of it, you can drain it and gain access to 4 gold item spawns, usually dropping 2 pieces of golden gear and 2 golden weapons. Capacitor has not only 1 but 3 charge towers inside of it, allowing for some next level cheese plays such as lifeline ultimate spam to get early game loot. Labs has a portal which you can land in when dropping out of the ship, but it goes both ways and can also be used as a balloon if you enter the portal from inside of the labs. Map Room features a map scan, which when activated scans the entire map and shows where every enemy on the server currently is. In addition to this, it also shows the amount of enemies nearby, very much like Crypto's drone passive. Containment has a near guaranteed golden item in this spot with the trees. But not everyone knows that there's actually usually decent loot at the top of this tower, which can only be reached by landing on it or using abilities. The supply ship spawns every game and lands in a predetermined location marked on the map. It has high tier items and guaranteed shield spawns, but not enough to supply a whole team. It can be worth dropping on the supply ship if it crosses or lands where you want to drop. If you want to drop and make sure that you are looted up for a mid-game fight or just to head straight into late game, you could drop in either Gauntlet, Airbase, Runoff, Spotted Lake, Crash Site, Artillery, Capacitor, Repulsor, Map Room, Water Treatment, Cage, or Labs. These POIs drop a lot of loot and usually will make sure that your entire team is set up. Keep in mind that these POIs are pretty sought after, so the odds of getting contested on drop are fairly high. And the sheer size of these drop spots might lead to the other team looting up and leaving before you actually getting to fight them, or a fight getting drawn out long enough that you might end up getting third-partied. The loot of the rest of the POIs is usually not as spread out and a lot more condensed, with the downside that the loot simply isn't as good. If you drop in any of these smaller points of interest, you usually have to supplement it by looting on the way or stretching into some of the unmarked loot areas. These smaller POIs and unmarked areas actually serve a second purpose, specifically when contesting. If you see 2 or more teams dropping hot on a POI, instead of joining the fray, you can look for the following drops to quickly third party with some basic to mid-tier loot. You can drop on these houses if you want to third party into Crash Sites. You can also drop into Artillery if you want to third party into Crash Sites. You can drop on these houses around here if you want to drop next into Spotted Lake. Same with these houses into Spotted Lake. One could argue these are related, but I'd say they're different. You can drop on this house here if you want to third party Spotted Lake. We can also drop here if you want to go into Containment. If 2 teams are fighting on, or if teams are fighting in Artillery and contesting, you can either drop on the pills outside here and then rotate in, or you can drop on these here and rotate in. You can also go from this high ground. You can also go straight down into Containment and third party that. You can also drop on these houses and third party that. You can also drop here and third party that if you would like to. That's also a very good way to third party into Containment. And when it comes to Runoff, you can drop on these houses and third party that. You can also go from Pit to third party Spotted Lake. You can go from Pit to third party Runoff. You also have these bins here. Nobody really drops on Bunker, but if you would want to third party Bunker, you can either drop on the no name here, or you can drop on the east part of the loot here.
and you can go in. While you are here, you can also third party from here down into airbase, or all the way to runoff if you like, or even pit. This is a great place to drop in third party. Airbase itself is actually a third party drop. You can, you know, you can land south and then rotate up to third party up and runoff. You can also third party down into gauntlet if you would like. Gauntlet can be contested usually when dropping here and running in. That's a very solid one if, you know, airbase is taken or whatever. This spot here and this spot as well can both be used to third party into salvage. You can actually take the balloon from gauntlet and third party into salvage as well. So that makes a lot of sense. Salvage is a really bad spot to drop because of all of these third party spots. You know, not to mention all the ones already showed. You can also drop here. You can also drop here or just mark it. All of these are perfect to third party straight into salvage. It's always going to be a melting pot in salvage if a lot of teams fight there. When it comes to caustic treatment, you can drop here, you can drop here, you can drop here. All of these are perfect third parties to deal with caustic treatment. You're usually pretty cut off. You could drop here in third party, but that's kind of delayed. Instead, if you do drop here for third party, you would want to instead go for repulsor or maybe map room. If you drop on map room, you want to go for repulsor. You could go for caustic treatment for third party. If you drop on hydro dam, you can also go for repulsor. If you drop on repulsor, you can go for hydro dam to third party. If teams drop in swamps, you can drop on hydro dam. You can go for third party, and you can also drop you can also drop on labs and third party swamps. You can usually just get these houses and go. These buildings here, south of rig, you can go to third party swamps, you can third party rig, you can third party capacitor. If several teams drop on capacitor, you can drop on these houses in third party, you can drop on these houses in third party, you can drop on the broken relay in third party. From broken relay, you can also go to the rig in third party. There's a little bit of loot here. If Cage ends up fighting, you can go here to third party. You can go down to market to third party, though it's not really much of a point because of the melting pot. You can also drop here to third party, either Cage or capacitor, depending.
And yeah, I think that's most of them. So this is the perfect example of why, you know, we only have 10 squads in zone 2. After you have dropped and stabilized with decent loot, you usually want to avoid fighting and instead focus on getting into the zone with a safe position before looking for kills. This is because it's an incredibly high third party risk, as you could see in the previous map, at all times of the game, but especially in the early to mid game when most of the teams are rotating. You can initiate a fight that you know is clean or try to fish for kills when there is a big melting pot of teams, but try to never fully engage and keep a foot out the door to disengage when another team inevitably joins the fray. I usually give a fight about 10 to 20 seconds. If it hasn't been closed out by then, I try to pull back and reset. As for positions, where are you supposed to rotate to? What's the end goal? As a general rule of thumb, you want to look out for positions that have a high ground, especially since the strongest high grounds in this map can only be reached through Legends abilities, meaning that they are very difficult to push once a team has stationed themselves there. There are a few buildings on the map and even less buildings that are truly powerful. There's plenty of sheds like these which have infinite amount of angles you can be shot through. They work in a pinch, but usually end up costing you a game if you overstay your welcome. Depending on your timing, composition, playstyle, and lobbies, you want to look for setting up on the so-called god spots, or setting up near them so you can contest them later on. A god spot is a position on the map that is hard to push that are usually in the final ring and allow you to win the game as long as you stay on this position and play your cards right. Some of these might be dangerous to hold early in the game due to how sought after they are, but are invaluable in late game. Every map has positions that are good to hold, but I'd argue that Kings Canyon has the most god spots of every map. This spot is actually fairly easy to hold and is useful for a multitude of center map zones, either for gatekeeping rest beacon zones or having an unclimbable high ground if it ends in the water below. Airbase actually has several incredibly strong positions, and it comes down to the specific circle and how teams are playing. But I would argue that the very end of the landing strips are very powerful thanks to the cover and the open ground leading to them. And the top of the walls are incredibly useful as well. Teams positioned on the walls actually cancel each other out, and the walls that are closest to the landing strips will cancel out the viability of the landing strip god spots. This all comes down to the endgame timing, and I would argue that they all sort of tie together and can be played by the same team at different stages of the game. The repulsor walls are also game winners for several spots around and outside of repulsor, even towards the map room. They also sort of kind of cancel each other out, but if you are there first, you can apply pressure to the other walls. This high ground is huge. You can cut off teams trying to rotate from cage or labs by ambushing or holding the choke, and when the zone closes, you have high ground for several swamp endings and can even siege the houses below if forced to. The top of cage seems self-explanatory. It can be scaled and sieged by abilities, but there's really only one way up, and it is incredibly defense-sided. If you control the top 2 floors, you can win every game around cage. You can actually climb to the top of the cage from the inside by going here. There are a few endings right below this cliff wall at the way to artillery. You may be exposed by the 3rd or 4th ring, but afterwards you have free shots on almost every team below you. These bridges are super strong, and it's really only one way up except with some abilities, and you have plenty of cover combined with a 360-degree view. Thanks to their height, you can make a lot of pressure and easily rotate away from them, even if it's not necessarily immediately next to an ending. A decent chunk of rings end in the western part of artillery. These 2 houses are absolute god spots and don't really cancel each other out. You can either play inside of this house once pressure ramps up enough that you can't safely siege it, or stay at the top part of this big building to stay on a safe high ground all the way up until the final ring. This one kinda depends on the zone, but both of these are valid spots. The first spot around the rest beacon gives you a great high ground with wide view that's hard to push as long as you hold the choke. As soon as the choke is out of the zone, you have a high ground where the only way up is by running up a hill without cover. If you look farther north, there's some open ground and sort of a cliff or a plateau that can be climbed. This is also useful for very north zones, but it's rare that it actually sees play. This has to be one of the most difficult high grounds to push. Climbing is fairly easy with one ability, but you're exposed from any team that might be around rig and the team that's on top of its high ground. To be fair, there's not really much cover when you are up there, but the sheer height of the rig allows you to always have a head glitch on anyone. And there's even a few endings that close near the god spot. If you need to, you can drop in either direction and on top of the roof if you'd want to. Admittedly, this house is fairly exposed, but super useful if the ring pulls to any of the many endings nearby. Calling it a god spot might be a bit of a stretch, but it was worth mentioning because of how much pressure it unlocks playing from this position. These are the god spots that stand out to me, and I'm sure there are plenty of good spots, but these are usually highly contested in higher rated lobbies due to their power. In order to get access to these positions, you need compositions not only with good rotational abilities to get there in time, but usually strong vertical presence as well. These are the compositions that you should use for Kings Canyon Ranked. Almost every composition wants a legend with good verticality, in order to take or contest high grounds in the late game. There are a few different types of compositions, but for the sake of simplicity, I'm going to break them down into 4 separate distinctions. Aggro comps, mobility comps, passive comps, and sustain comps. Aggro comps are meant for fighting. The legend's abilities allow you to set up and close the fights fast, and at the same time allow you to reset quickly on the move. If you're looking for an aggro composition, you're looking for 1 or 2 aggro rotation legends and 1 supportive legend. My example would be Octane, Bangalore, and Bloodhound. Octane is good for opening damage and pushing on your enemies if you get an opening. Bangalore can smoke enemies off to force a 1v1 or 3v3 without third party, and Bloodhound gives information so you can push. In this specific interaction, Bloodhound and Bangalore actually lets you smoke off a team and then just kill them with wall hacks. You can also swap the Octane for an Ash, Wraith, or Horizon. You can swap the Bangalore for a Valkyrie, Pathfinder, or Fuse. You can swap the Bloodhound for Gibraltar, Lifeline, or Revenant. A mobility comp is meant for fast rotations to the late game, but also to secure positioning at any time of the game. A mobility composition wants 2 rotational legends combined with 1 support. An example of this would be Ash, Valkyrie, and Gibraltar. Ash gives you fast vertical late game rotations, and Valkyrie can be used for mid game and early rotations, and Gibraltar allows you to reset, and it can also be used in conjunction with Valkyrie's ultimate to safely bubble Valkyrie out. You can swap the Ash for a Wraith, Octane, or even a Horizon. You can swap Valkyrie for a Pathfinder. You can really mix and match the 2 rotational legends, but you have to make sure you end up with a scan. But make sure to keep 1 support legend such as Gibraltar, Watson, or Caustic so you have some backbone and a way to stay safe once you have a position. A passive composition is meant for early rotations and holding good spots in the zone. It doesn't necessarily have to go for the aforementioned god spots, just good enough spots close enough for endgame. Passive compositions want 1 or 2 rotational characters and then the other half support or defensive characters. Being able to scan the beacon for zone and a legend that can hold down an area is a must. An example of this would be the Valkyrie, Crypto, and Caustic composition. You can swap the Valkyrie for a Wraith, Ash, or Pathfinder, and you can swap the Crypto for a Gibraltar, Watson, or even a Loba. Sustain compositions usually want to take zone early or at the very least a good position and then harass and snipe the other teams, with the goal to out-sustain them by having the strongest economy when the game ends. These teams rely heavily on Loba, usually coupled with rotational legends and as support. For example, Loba Valkyrie Gibraltar, or Loba Pathfinder Gibraltar, or Loba Caustic Valkyrie. You need to be able to scan a beacon, rotate and set up, but also use the black market for sustain and ideally a defensive legend for anchoring. These are all suggestions, and honestly you can mix and match it however you want. If I'd explain every possible composition, this would be a way longer video, but hopefully this gives you a good idea of how you want to build your team composition for Kings Canyon. If you guys want to see more videos on specific compositions, let me know in the comments. As for weapons, the diversity of Kings Canyon means you can practically play any guns or combinations that you feel like, but due to the nature of the map, anyone with a god spot or good high ground will get to poke a lot. As such, you may want to have 1 or 2 marksman or sniper weapons to poke the enemy teams. If you plan on playing edge and fighting, you're looking for mid to close range weapons such as assault rifles, SMGs, and of course shotguns. It is worth reiterating that the meta will be a little bit different from the previous rank split due to the small map and its high ground, but I'm excited to see how Kings Canyon plays in ranked this time around. If you guys want to see a guide on how to climb any rank in Apex, that video is on the screen right now. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you all tomorrow.